Obadiah is the shortest book of the Old Testament. The name Obadiah means servant of Yahweh. There are others with that name in the Old Testament, such as in 1 Kings 18, but this prophet is regarded as unknown. It is unusual also that his father's name is not given. His prophecy, which he calls a vision like Isaiah and Nahum, is one of judgment against foreigners. It is mainly about Edom, once Israel's brother, but the focus widens to include all who have abused and gloated over God's people. The precise date is not known, nor are there any features which would particularly narrow it down, except that it appears that Judah has been ravaged by the Babylonians. The narratives of this event, 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles, do not mention Edom's role in it, but the memory of it is found elsewhere, such as Psalm 137 verse 7 and Lamentations 4 verse 21. In chapter 49 of Jeremiah, we find a strikingly similar oracle of judgment against Edom. Perhaps Obadiah knew Jeremiah's prophecies. Scholars, as it will not surprise you, continue to debate the question. Verse 1 of Obadiah is similar to Jeremiah 49:14, though Jeremiah says, "I have heard," whereas in Obadiah it is, "we have heard." The "we" might suggest the divine counsel, which the prophet has been privy to, like Micaiah in 1 Kings 22, verses 19 to 22. Perhaps, like the lying spirit sent to the prophets of Ahab to lure him to his doom, another messenger has been dispatched from the divine council to summon the nations to Edom for battle and judgment. In verse 2, the speaker switches from Obadiah amongst the angels to the Lord himself who speaks to Edom. The initial charge he brings against them is pride. They think themselves impregnable in their high fortress set into a cliff. This fortress may be Selah, mentioned in 2 Kings 14 verse 7. The name is a pun of the Hebrew for rock. But even though they build their nests among the stars, the Lord will bring them down. This is very like Isaiah 14, the morning star who set his throne above the stars, but was brought down to Sheol, the grave. Verses 5 to 9 suffice for a description of the judgment, but it is not as vivid and violent as it is in other prophecies. Instead, Obadiah emphasizes the desolation of Edom, its final condition. Verse 5 contains powerful prophetic rhetoric. Thieves are bad news, but at least they only take what they want. They leave the rest. Likewise, even those who harvest the vines, they still leave the gleanings. Not so with Edom. As verse 6 puts it, Esau's treasures will be sought out. Esau is named here as the father of Edom, in anticipation of Judah's father Jacob being mentioned in verse 10. In verses 7 to 9, we see that Esau will lose everything. His allies, who will betray him, his reputation for wisdom, his wise men did not anticipate this betrayal and were baffled by it, and his warriors. Those who ate his bread laid a trap. This is a reference to a former close relationship when his friends ate at his table. Verses 10 to 14 now spell out why all this will come to pass. It is because of Esau's shameful treatment of his brother Jacob. The list of sins gets grimmer as it goes on, which by the end of verse 13 includes looting the city, and in verse 14, preventing the survivors from escaping, and instead handing them over to their enemies. This goes well beyond merely being privately pleased at what had happened. Normally, the reasons for judgment precede the judgment oracle, but Obadiah has held it back until this point. The effect is more dramatic. The judgment oracle widens now in verses 15 to 16 to the other nations, in whose guilt Edom shares for what they have done to Israel. Verse 15 makes explicit the simple law of talion. As you have done, it shall be done to you. Verse 16 evokes an image of Edom's celebration on Mount Zion, quaffing wine amongst the carnage, rubble, and sky blackened by smoke. You and the nations will drink again, but this time from a different cup. This is the cup of the wrath of the Lord, known particularly from Jeremiah 25, but also found in Psalm 75, verse 8, and referred to again in that similar oracle mentioned earlier in Jeremiah 49, verse 12. The result is that they will all be completely destroyed, as if they had never been. From verse 17 onwards to the end, the hope for Israel begins to contrast that of the doom for Esau. Now they will possess the towns and areas which belonged to Edom, and those which they formerly had and lost, as described in verse 19. Thus, Obadiah belongs to that group of the prophets whose vision of hope is focused on the return of the exiles. The exiles from Jerusalem who are in Sepharad, mentioned in verse 20, are probably in Sardis in Asia Minor. The Targum, a commentary on the Bible in Aramaic, identified it as Spain, and so the Jews there called themselves the Sephardim, hence Sephardic Jew. In later times, especially after the destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans, some Jews thought that Obadiah was partly referring to that tragedy as well, and therefore referred to Rome as Edom. The prophecy ends in verse 21 with a promise of salvation and restoration. Some Jewish interpreters wondered if this referred to the Messianic age, but there is no Davidic king mentioned. Indeed, the kingdom belongs to the Lord, meaning that God himself is king. Those who have been saved could also mean the Saviours, who will rule or judge Mount Esau. It seems then that this happy outcome is being figured as a return to the period of the judges, who rescued Israel and ruled it under the one kingship of God. I think it is probably fair to say that prophetic vision was only granted a limited distance and perhaps a limited clarity. They obviously had to draw on the rich fund of images which are found in the scriptures and even other well-regarded prophecies. The complete picture of salvation was only to be given in Christ. As the author of Hebrews writes, "Long ago, God spoke to our ancestors in many and various ways by the prophets, but in these last days he has spoken to us by a Son."